Today's story comes from a woman we'll call Vivian, a trauma surgeon. The kind of person who stays calm when everyone else is panicking, because someone has to. For 6 years, her ex-husband's family told an entire town that she was the reason the marriage had no children. They said it at church. They said it in grocery stores. They said it until she almost believed it herself. Then, her mother-in-law said it one time too many, in a hospital, out loud, in front of witnesses, and Vivian, who had stayed quiet for 6 years, finally decided to pull the one record nobody wanted opened. This is what happened.
My name is Vivian Cross. I'm 37 years old. I'm a trauma surgeon at a Level 2 center in central Missouri. I spend my nights putting people back together. Car accidents, farm equipment injuries, the occasional gunshot. My hands don't shake. They've never shaken. Not in the operating room. The only time in my life my hands ever shook was standing in a hospital hallway at 3 a.m., listening to my former mother-in-law tell a nurse, loudly so everyone could hear, that leaving me was the best decision her son ever made. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Pauses. I married Adrian Fowler when I was 27. I was a surgical resident. He sold agricultural equipment. He was charming in the way that men who've never been told no are charming. His mother, Lorraine, ran the women's circle at their church. 30 years. Nobody got married, buried, or forgiven in that town without Lorraine's approval. She loved Adrian the way some mothers love an only son. Completely, blindly, and at everyone else's expense. For the first 3 years, Adrian and I tried to have a baby. It didn't happen. I did what any doctor would do. I got tested. Everything came back normal. Perfectly. Completely normal. So I asked Adrian to get tested too. He refused. He refused for 6 months. Then a year. Then he stopped talking about it entirely. And when I pushed, gently, because I loved him, he'd get this look on his face. Cold. Final. "There's nothing wrong with me," he'd say. "Maybe you should look at yourself." Sighs. Here's the thing about being a doctor married to someone who won't get tested. You know exactly what his refusal means. You know it in the part of your brain that reads lab results for a living. But knowing isn't proof. And I loved him. So I stayed quiet. That was my first mistake. Staying quiet. Pauses. Lorraine started the rumor at church. I don't know exactly when. These things don't have a start date. They just seep into a town like groundwater. But by the time I noticed it, everyone had already decided. Poor Adrian. He wanted children so badly, and Vivian just couldn't. Some women just aren't built for it. That was Lorraine's phrase. Some women just aren't built for it. She said it so many times it became a kind of prayer. I heard it from a nurse at my own hospital. I heard it from the woman who cut my hair. I heard it from a patient's mother in the waiting room who didn't know I was the surgeon. And I said nothing. For 6 years, I said nothing. Because I'm a private person. Because I thought the truth would protect itself. Because I didn't want to expose Adrian. I was protecting the man who was letting a whole town believe I was broken. Pauses. Then came Renee. Renee Marchetti had been my best friend for 17 years, since nursing school, before I went to medical school. She was the maid of honor at my wedding. She knew everything, every private detail, every tear I cried about not getting pregnant, every time Adrian refused the test. She'd sit with me on my kitchen floor and hold my hand and say, "You deserve so much better than this, Viv." She was right. I did. I just didn't know she meant she'd be the one to take it. Pauses. Adrian left me on a Tuesday. He didn't explain much. He said we'd grown apart. He said he needed to find happiness. He moved out that weekend. 3 months later, I found out he'd moved in with Renee. 7 months after that, Renee was pregnant. And the whole town exhaled with relief, because now they had their proof. Adrian wasn't the problem. Vivian was. Look, he found a real woman, and she gave him a baby. Just like that. Lorraine threw a shower at the church. I performed surgery that day. A 16-year-old with a ruptured spleen. I saved his life. Then I went home and sat in my car in the garage for 2 hours. Pauses. I might have stayed quiet forever. I'm being honest with you. I might have let them win because I was tired, and grief makes you tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. But then the hospital board denied my promotion. I'd been in line to become chief of trauma surgery for 2 years. I'd earned it. My outcomes were the best in the department. My peer reviews were flawless. The board chair called me into his office. He was uncomfortable. He wouldn't look at me. He said there were concerns about stability, about personal matters affecting judgment, about reputation in the community. I said, "What reputation?" He said, "Vivian, people talk. The circumstances of your divorce, the difficulties. The board just wants someone settled." They passed me over. For a lie Lorraine Fowler had been watering for 6 years. That was the day I stopped being quiet. I hired a lawyer named Diane Whitlock. Diane had 28 years of experience and the calmest voice I've ever heard outside of an operating room. I told her everything. The rumors, the passed-over promotion, the 6 years of "some women just aren't built for it." She listened. Then she asked me one question. "Vivian, did Adrian ever get fertility testing?" I said, "Not that I know of. He always refused." Diane tilted her head. She said, "You're a surgeon. In your medical opinion, based on everything you've told me, do you believe the infertility was yours?" I said, "No, I don't." She said, "Then let's find out for certain. Defamation cases live or die on truth. If Lorraine and Adrian have been telling people you're infertile, and it isn't true, that's not gossip. That's a false statement of fact that cost you a promotion. That's actionable." Pauses. "We filed a defamation suit, not against Adrian, against Lorraine, because she was the one who'd made specific, repeated, damaging statements to specific people, including someone on my hospital board. Here's what most people don't understand about lawsuits. Once you file, you get discovery. And discovery means you can subpoena records, medical records, under a protective order, reviewed by the court. Diane subpoenaed Adrian's complete medical history. His lawyer fought it. Hard. They fought it for 6 weeks. Which, if you know anything about medicine, told me everything I needed to know before I even saw the file. Because innocent records don't get defended that hard. Pauses. The hearing was in the county courthouse. Lorraine was there, in her Sunday dress. 6 women from her church circle sat behind her like a jury she'd brought from home. Adrian was there, next to his lawyer, not looking at me. Renee was not there. I found out later she'd been told not to come. Diane stood up. She was holding a single document. She said, "Your Honor, the defense has repeatedly stated, to multiple witnesses over a 6-year period, that the plaintiff, Dr. Cross, was medically responsible for the couple's inability to conceive. We've obtained, under this court's protective order, the defendant's son's own medical records." Adrian's lawyer stood up fast, objected, overruled. Diane continued. She said, "Adrian Fowler was diagnosed with a zoospermia, the complete absence of viable sperm, 6 years ago, at a fertility clinic, under his own name. He has known this entire time that biological children were medically impossible for him." The courtroom went completely silent. Pauses. I watched Lorraine's face. She didn't understand at first. You could see it. The words were too clinical. Azoospermia. She didn't know what it meant. And then she did. Because if Adrian couldn't father children 6 years ago, then the baby, Renee's baby, the one from the church shower, the one that was supposed to be the proof that I was broken, that baby was not Adrian's. Adrian stood up. He was shouting something about privacy, about the records being sealed, about his lawyer doing something. The judge was banging the gavel. And Lorraine stood up in her Sunday dress, in front of her church circle, and she said the only thing she knew how to say. She said it like a reflex. She said it while her whole world came apart. Some women just aren't built for it. Pauses. I stood up. I hadn't planned to speak. Diane hadn't wanted me to. But I stood up, and the judge, maybe because I was calm, maybe because everyone else was not, let me. I looked at Lorraine, not at Adrian, at Lorraine. I said, "You're right, Lorraine. One person in that marriage was never built to have children." And then I sat down. Pauses. The rest happened fast, the way these things do once the truth is finally in the room. Adrian's lawyer requested a recess. Lorraine settled the defamation suit out of court within a week. A written retraction, read aloud at her own church, and damages that covered my legal fees several times over. But the part I didn't plan, the part I couldn't have planned, happened 3 days after the hearing. A man named Victor Salas showed up at my hospital. He asked to speak with me. He was nervous. He was holding a folder. He said, "Dr. Cross, I think we have a mutual problem. I've been seeing Renee Marchetti for 2 years. I just found out about a baby. And I found out about a paternity question. I did a test." He opened the folder. The baby was his. Pauses. Here's where everyone ended up. Adrian moved 2 states over. The town he'd spent his whole life impressing now knew exactly what he was, and there's no coming back from that in a small place. Lorraine lost the women's circle. 30 years of running that church, and within a month she was sitting alone in a back pew. The town that had believed every word she said now remembered every word she said. Renee and Victor are in a custody dispute. I don't follow it. It's not my style.
So what was Vivian's story really about? Not infertility, not a cheating husband, not even a cruel mother-in-law. It was about a specific kind of damage that psychologists have studied for decades, the cost of protecting someone who is hurting you. Pauses. Vivian knew, as a doctor, she almost certainly knew, years before the court did, that the infertility wasn't hers. But she stayed quiet. She protected Adrian's secret. She absorbed a lie about her own body to shield a man who was letting the whole town believe it. Psychologists call this self-silencing. It's a documented pattern, especially in women, especially in marriages. You suppress your own truth to keep the peace, to protect the relationship, to avoid being the one who caused the conflict. And here's what the research shows about self-silencing. It doesn't keep you safe, it makes you sick. It's linked to depression, to physical illness, and to exactly the kind of slow erosion of self that Vivian described. Sitting in a car in a garage for 2 hours, wondering if maybe the lie was true. Pauses. Vivian didn't get her life back when Adrian left. She didn't get it back when the affair was exposed. She got it back the moment she decided her silence was no longer a gift she owed anyone. Here's the part worth remembering. Silence can be dignity, but silence can also be self-erasure. And the difference is whether you chose it or whether someone else is depending on it. The truth doesn't need you to shout, but sometimes it needs you to stop protecting the people who are counting on you to stay quiet. Have you ever stayed silent to protect someone who wouldn't have done the same for you? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And next week's story? A woman who inherited her grandmother's house and found a second set of blueprints hidden in the walls that revealed why 3 generations of her family had never spoken about the basement. Subscribe so you don't miss it.